The alert scrolled across the console of the Wayward Goose with the sterile finality of a tombstone engraving. Tess O'Connor barely glanced at it at first, focused on the fuel balance calculations for her run from Korvani Prime to the outer belt. Her cargo hold was full of industrial terraforming coils, nothing alive, nothing urgent. She liked it that way. Then the subject line caught her eye. Incident resolution, Dawn Chorus. 42 juvenile passengers declared deceased. Tess stopped breathing for a moment. 42 kids. The Dawn Chorus had been a mid-range passenger liner that vanished 3 standard days ago in the debris field of the Trachis Ring. The official story was a catastrophic guidance failure. No survivors. Case closed. She should have deleted the message and moved on. Freighter captains didn't get paid to mourn strangers, but something made her open the attached telemetry log, and her throat tightened when she saw it. A faint, looped signal buried in the static. A child's voice singing a lullaby in the Korvani dialect. It was woven into an automated mayday that no one had bothered to scrub. The stasis pod transponders were still pinging. Weak failing, but pinging. Tess's hand hovered over the comms panel. The official bulletin was explicit. No rescue operation would be mounted. The Dawn Chorus was in a hazard zone, and the Korvani Authority had already issued death certificates to the families. To the galaxy, those children were ghosts now. Convenient ones that wouldn't require expensive recovery or embarrassing questions about why a liner's safety systems failed so completely. She pictured a circle of small pods in the dark, their temperature alarms blinking, oxygen scrubbers clogging one by one, the lullaby playing over and over to no one. Tess slammed the comms open. Trachis Orbital Control, this is Free Freighter, Wayward Goose, registration, Tango Oscar 881. I've got a distress beacon from the Dawn Chorus wreck. Diverting to investigate, over. The response came back cold and immediate. Wayward Goose, be advised the Dawn Chorus site is under quarantine pending structural collapse. All approaches are prohibited, acknowledge. Acknowledge prohibition, Tess said, her voice flat. Diverting anyway. She killed the channel before the controller could reply and slammed the thrusters to full burn, angling the Goose toward the glittering knife edge of the Trachis Ring. The hull groaned as she pushed past the recommended safe velocity for a laden freighter. Warning chimes sang around her. She silenced them one by one. Her co-pilot AI, a clipped and long-suffering personality she'd named Grumble, spoke up. Captain, the debris field density is 12% above this vessel's rated tolerance. The Korvani Authority will almost certainly revoke your port license and file a warrant. Let them file, Tess said, her eyes fixed on the navigation plot. Those kids are still in their pods. The transponders are running on battery backups that won't last another cycle. You have no legal obligation, Grumble noted, but its tone softened at the edges. As close to hesitant as a machine could get, human emotional imperatives do not align with profit or survival metrics. Tess almost laughed. Grumble, that's the most human thing you've ever said. She wrenched the ship into a corkscrew to avoid a tumbling asteroid the size of a city block. The cargo straps groaned. Keep scanning for the pod signatures. I want to know the second one goes dark. She had no plan beyond get there, find them, and figure out the rest when her hands were on the pods. The galaxy had already written a eulogy for 42 children. Tess O'Connor was just the idiot who refused to read it. The Wayward Goose punched through the outer ring like a bullet through shattered glass. Micro-debris peppered the hull, and Tess heard 1,000 tiny death rattles against the plating. She ignored them. Her nav screen was a nightmare of red collision vectors, and her hands danced across the controls with the desperate precision of someone who had learned to fly in the chaos of Earth's own debris-cluttered orbit. Grumble's voice cut through the alarms. Captain, I have isolated the nursery section. It remains structurally intact, attached to the engineering spine. Atmosphere vented from all adjoining compartments, but the sealed hatches held. 28 stasis pods still broadcasting. Tess felt the number like a punch to the chest. 28 out of 42. 14 already dark. She hadn't been fast enough for them, and she'd carry that weight. But 28 were still singing their tiny electronic heartbeats into the void, and she would not let them go. She brought the Goose alongside the wreck, overriding the magnetic clamps manually when the docking AI refused to engage with a quarantined vessel. The airlock cycled with a shudder, and Tess pulled on her EVA helmet. the visor fogging for half a second before the suit's climate control caught up. She stepped into the corpse of the dawn chorus. The nursery was a wide circular chamber designed to look cheerful under normal lights. Now it was a frozen tomb, its walls scorched where a power conduit had blown. In the center, arranged like petals around a central control pillar, stood 42 stasis pods sized for children. Some glowed with faint status indicators, amber, critical red, a few steady green. 14 were utterly dark, their tiny occupants already gone. Tess moved to the nearest pod and checked the readout. A Vrel child, silicate-based, requiring extreme cold. The pod's cooling system was failing, the internal temperature creeping upward. She patched her suit's power supply into the pod's external port, and the temperature stabilized with a grateful hum. She marked the pod for immediate transfer and moved to the next. One of the dark pods caught her eye. A Gizanti infant, methane breather, its pod window frosted over with crystallized respiratory fluid. Tess pressed her glove to the glass for a second, then turned away. Grief was a luxury she could afford later. She worked in a trance, hauling pods 2 and 3 at a time through the airlock and into the Goose's cargo bay. Her muscles screamed. The cargo bay wasn't designed for life support, and she had no proper environmental frames. She'd have to improvise, but first she needed every surviving pod aboard before the Korvani Authority showed up. Grumble's alert tone was sharper than usual. Captain, Korvani Authority cruiser Silent Verdict has altered course and is burning hard for this location. They are broadcasting a sector-wide quarantine enforcement declaration. You are now designated a rogue salvager and subject to lethal force authorization. Tess dragged a Gizanti pod, still pulsing faint green, onto the cargo lift. How long? 8 hours at their current velocity. Possibly less if they push their drives. Then we're done in 4, Tess said. She looked at the remaining pods, 9 still waiting in the nursery. The lullaby still looped faintly through her suit's external audio pickup. A thin, reedy melody that had been sung to frighten children in the dark for days. She steadied her breathing and got back to work. The cargo bay of the Wayward Goose had never been meant to hold life. It was a box of steel and circuit breakers smelling of hydraulic fluid and old coolant. Tess tore out the environmental control panels and began rewiring them with a fusion cutter and the kind of reckless ingenuity that would make a shipwright weep. She had 4 different species to keep alive. Vrel children who needed cryogenic temperatures, Xanti who breathed a methane-ammonia mix, 2 young Korvani of the same species that had declared them dead, and a single Dravish infant whose high-pressure requirements would crush the others if its pod seals failed. Tess carved the bay into zones using cargo netting and emergency pressure curtains, bleeding her own ship's atmosphere reserves to feed the oxygen breathers while venting fuel cell methane into a sealed corner for the Gizanti. The work nearly killed her twice. A ruptured methane feed flooded her workspace while she was adjusting a pod monitor, and she spent 3 minutes choking on fumes before she could get her helmet sealed. The world swam, her lungs burned, and for a horrible moment she saw the children's faces behind her eyelids, all of them, even the ones she'd already lost. She crawled to the medkit, injected a broad-spectrum antitoxin, and went back to the pods. Grumble kept count. 7 hours until Silent Verdict arrives. 27 pods stable. 28 if you can restore power to the Dravish pod's compression coil. I'm on it, Tess rasped. She was rewiring the coil with strips of galley heating filament when a Xanti pod let out a long, wavering alarm. She scrambled across the bay, slipping on a patch of frozen Vrel atmosphere condensate, and saw the readout: cardiac arrest. The tiny methane breather inside had stopped fighting. Tess overrode the pod's emergency revival sequence. She pumped heat into the respiratory system, manually cycled the atmosphere, and spoke to the child through the external speaker, not caring that the infant couldn't understand her language. Come on, little one. Come on, I'm here. You're not alone in the dark, okay? I've got you. The pod beeped once, twice. The alarm went silent and the life sign monitor flatlined. Tess sat back on her heels, her hands trembling. 27. She reached up and touched the pod's frosted window, leaving a smear of grease and dried blood. Then she very gently unplugged the pod from the daisy-chained power grid so it wouldn't drain the others. She didn't cry. Her body was too dehydrated for tears, but something in her chest calcified into a cold, immovable knot. 6 hours, Grumble said, its voice uncharacteristically subdued. Captain, I am detecting a directive from the Silent Verdict. They are broadcasting that you are in possession of biocontaminated wreckage and must jettison all pods immediately or be fired upon. Tess stood up and walked to the cockpit, her legs unsteady. She stared at the tactical display where the Korvani cruiser burned toward her like a closing fist. Her ship had no weapons to speak of, just a point defense grid meant for micrometeors. She had 27 children in a jury-rigged life support maze and a heart full of fury. "Open a channel," she said. The channel opened, and Commander Zoltek's voice filled the cockpit, oily with bureaucratic contempt. "Human vessel, you are in direct violation of Quarantine Statute 794. You will power down your engines, unlock your cargo bay, and prepare to be boarded. Any deviation will be met with lethal force." Tess leaned toward the mic. "Commander, my cargo bay is full of living children your authority declared dead 4 hours ago. I'm transmitting their biosignature logs directly to the Trackies relay network. Every ship in the sector will see them in about 90 seconds. You want to explain to the galaxy why you fired on a freighter full of kids?" She hit transmit. The data streamed out. 27 distinct life signs, species IDs, pod telemetry, all of it time-stamped and authenticated. Somewhere out there, comm officers on 100 ships were opening a file that would make their mandibles drop. Zoltek's pause was a full 3 seconds. "You are bluffing." "Check your own relays," Tess said. "The truth is already out there, Commander. The only question now is whether you compound a cover-up with a massacre." She cut the channel and scrambled back to the cargo bay. The Dravish child's compression coil was still failing, and if she couldn't stabilize it, the pod would implode. She stripped the heating element from her own galley oven. She wasn't going to be eating anyway, and fused it into the coil housing with a plasma solder. The pod's internal pressure stabilized with a shuddering groan that sounded almost alive. 27. Still 27. Grumble's voice crackled over the bay speakers. "Captain, the silent verdict is accelerating. They have locked target acquisition on our drive section." Tess ran back to the cockpit and saw the warning. A particle beam had been fired. Not a direct hit. The shot passed close enough to sear the Goose's port engine nacelle, and the ship lurched violently. Alarms screamed. The main drive went dark, and Tess's stomach dropped as the artificial gravity flickered. "They've disabled our FTL," she said, the words tasting like ash. "We're dead in the water." "Correct," Grumble said. "Conventional thrusters remain operational marginally." Tess's mind raced. She couldn't run and she couldn't fight, but she could position the ship. With a snarl of desperate clarity, she fired the maneuvering thrusters and rotated the wayward Goose so that its broad, reinforced cargo section faced the cruiser. Between the particle cannons and the children, there was now several hundred tons of bulkhead cargo netting and one very stubborn human. Zoltek's voice returned, angrier now. "You are shielding biocontaminants with your own hull? This is insanity." "Call it whatever you want," Tess replied. "You want to shoot those kids, you're going to have to shoot through me first. And the whole sector is watching." She locked the ship's orientation and left the cockpit. In the cargo bay, the pods glowed in their makeshift zones, the lullaby still playing quietly from a salvaged data slate. Tess sat down with her back against a Xanti pod, its faint warmth vibrating through her suit, and waited. The standoff stretched into its second hour. The silent verdict hung in space like a predator unwilling to strike in front of witnesses. Tess watched the tactical display from a portable screen she'd dragged into the cargo bay, her body wedged between a Vrel pod and a stack of environmental scrubbers. The ship's interior temperature had dropped to something tolerable for the silicate children, but punishing for her mammalian biology. Her breath fogged and her fingers were numb. On the comms, a cascade of new signals. The Trackies relay network was lighting up with incoming vessels, news drones, independent freighters, a medical ship from the Dravish Confederacy, all of them demanding answers. Tess could hear the chatter bleeding through open channels, angry demands from the families of the dead children, accusations of fraud, calls for Zoltek's immediate arrest. She had done that. One scruffy cargo pilot with a bolt cutter and a refusal to let 27 heartbeats go silent had cracked open a conspiracy. Zoltek's voice came through one last time, stripped of its earlier confidence. "Human vessel, this situation has escalated beyond your understanding. You are interfering in matters of interspecies insurance liability and political consequence that—" "Commander Zoltek," a new voice interrupted, sharp and official. Tess recognized the prefix code of the Korvani Internal Oversight Bureau. You are hereby relieved of command pending investigation into the deliberate sabotage of passenger liner Dawn Chorus. Your weapons authorization is revoked. Power down and prepare to receive a boarding party. The channel dissolved into confusion. Tess heard Zoltek shouting something about loyalty, followed by the unmistakable sound of a scuffle. Then silence. Then the silent verdict's weapon locks disengaged one by one, the targeting icons flickering out on Tess's screen. She exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding and slumped against the pod behind her. Grumble, tell me that's real. It is real, Captain. The silent verdict's executive officer has issued a formal statement of compliance with the Oversight Bureau. Commander Zoltek is in custody. Tess laughed, a ragged sound that scraped her raw throat. Good. That's good. She looked around at the pods, their steady lights painting the bay in soft amber and green. 27. She'd held the line with a crippled freighter and a whole lot of spite. But the ship was still dying. The damaged engine couldn't be repaired without a dry dock, and the life support patchwork was burning through power reserves at an unsustainable rate. The children needed a real medical facility, not a cargo bay held together with hope and galley wiring. She opened a wideband distress call. This is Freighter Wayward Goose, requesting immediate medical evacuation for 27 stasis pods containing juvenile survivors of the Dawn Chorus. Our life support is failing. Any ship in range, please respond. For a long, terrible moment, there was only static. Then a voice, warm and slightly gravelly, broke through. Wayward Goose, this is the independent freighter Star Chaser. We read you. We're coming in. The Star Chaser was a Dravish vessel, its hull scarred and patched from decades of hauling cargo through unfriendly space. Its captain was a broad-shouldered Dravish named Raxic, who had been a refugee himself once, fleeing a colonial purge with his entire clutch of siblings in a ship not much bigger than the Goose. He didn't ask questions when he saw the situation. He just docked, cycled his airlock, and started organizing the transfer with the efficiency of someone who had been saving lives before he was old enough to fly. We'll take the high-pressure pods first, Raxic said, his translator emitting a calm, steady tone. Our hold was modified for Dravish environmental needs. The Korvani children can go in the crew quarters. The Vrel need cold, will rig a portable chiller. Tess helped carry the pods, her muscles screaming, her vision blurring at the edges. The Janty infant was the hardest. She'd been monitoring its methane levels for hours, and the transfer had to be done quickly to avoid atmospheric shock. She cradled the pod in her arms as she crossed the docking tube, whispering the lullaby she'd heard so many times now it felt like her own. You know that song? Raxic asked, his multifaceted eyes tilting with what she had learned was Dravish curiosity. Not before this, Tess said, but I'm not going to forget it. They finished the transfer in 40 minutes. The Star Chaser's medical officer, a Korvani who had defected from the Authority years ago, began stabilizing the children with real equipment. 27 sets of vitals steadied. 27 pods hummed with healthy rhythms. Tess stood in the cargo bay of her own empty ship, surrounded by the ghostly imprints of where the pods had been, and finally let herself feel the full weight of it. She had lost 15 children, 15 small silent shapes in the dark that she would never see open their eyes, but 27 were alive because she had refused to turn away. Raxic came to stand beside her, his heavy frame making the deck plates creak. The Oversight Bureau has released a preliminary report. The Dawn Chorus was deliberately disabled by a remote override planted by a subsidiary of the insurance underwriters. They wanted to collect the policy payout and scrap the ship. The children were never supposed to be found alive. 15 of them got what they wanted, Tess said, her voice hollow. And 27 didn't, Raxic replied. Because of you. He placed a heavy, clawed hand on her shoulder. You should come aboard the Star Chaser. The children are waking up. They're asking about the voice they heard in the dark, the one that sang to them. Tess closed her eyes. The lullaby was still looping in her head, a melody she would carry for the rest of her life. Yeah, she said. Okay. The memorial service was held on Trackus Station 3 weeks later. 42 names were read aloud, the 27 survivors and the 15 who never made it out of their pods. Tess stood at the back of the assembly hall in a clean jumpsuit someone had loaned her, feeling out of place among the diplomats and family delegations. The children she had saved were there too, some walking on unsteady legs, Others carried in portable environment bubbles, all of them alive and blinking under the station lights. When the ceremony ended, a Korvani official approached her. The case had blown open, she said. The insurance fraud ring was dismantled. The families were suing. Commander Zoltek had been convicted of conspiracy and would spend the rest of his life in a penal colony. The authority wishes to express its formal gratitude, the official said, her compound eyes gleaming. You have exposed a terrible crime. I just didn't want them to die alone, Tess said. The official tilted her head. That is precisely why we are grateful. But the real surprise came afterward. A consortium of the children's surviving relatives, spanning 4 species, petitioned the Interspecies Custody Board to grant Tess O'Connor legal guardianship of all 27 survivors. They know her voice, the petition read. She was their first warmth after the cold. They will not thrive without her. Tess tried to argue against it. She was just a freighter pilot. She didn't know the first thing about raising alien children. But when she walked into the recovery ward and 27 small faces turned toward her, and the jaunty infant she'd nearly lost began to hum the lullaby she'd sung through the pod speaker, she stopped arguing. She spent the next year refitting the Wayward Goose. The cargo bay became a multi-environment living space, with bright murals painted on the walls and a classroom nook where a Dravish tutor gave lessons. The ship was rechristened 42 Lights, and on its hull, Tess installed a simple monument. 42 small running lamps. 27 burned bright. 15 glowed softer. A permanent twilight for the ones who hadn't made it. The galaxy called her a hero. The media called her the mother of ashes. Tess just called herself a pilot who couldn't ignore a lullaby. On the bridge of 42 Lights, with a jaunty toddler strapped into a modified co-pilot seat and a Vrel adolescent carefully adjusting the navigation sensors, Tess O'Connor plotted the next cargo run. A shipment of medical supplies to a colony on the fringe. Nothing dangerous, just work. Ready to jump, Captain Mother, Grumble said, its voice now officially reprogrammed to accommodate the children's honorific. Tess smiled. A real smile, tired and full of something she couldn't name. Punch it. The ship translated into the warp, and behind it 42 lights burned steady against the dark, a promise that no one would be left behind again.